Welcome and thank you for tuning into A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM with Lindsay, Manisha, Nilufar, Sanas, and Kristen. We are fourth-year Bachelor of Science in Nursing students at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo.
We are working to demystify health issues affecting our community, bringing you evidence-based information about our healthcare. This information is for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice of your primary healthcare provider.
We'd like to start our show by acknowledging and thanking the Coast Salish people whose unceded territory we have the opportunity to live, learn, and share educational experiences on.
Hello and good morning, everyone. My name is Nilufar and I'm your host for today's program. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting and popular topic, new addiction, social media, and technology. Regular checking and scrolling through social media has become an increasingly popular activity over the last decade. Many people spend large amounts of their time on social media and screen time without even realizing the passing of time. So we thought it would be beneficial if we talk about this prevalent issue and touch on some important impacts that this type of addiction has on our lives and come up with some ways to minimize this issue. There is no doubt that smartphones, tablets, and computers are very helpful and productive, but extreme use of these devices will interfere with our school, work, or even our relationships. Spending long hours on social media, feeling a urgent need for checking our notifications and different apps in our phones, playing video games rather than conversing and communicating with people around us, creates several negative consequences in our lives. It can alter our focus on performing our daily important tasks and responsibilities. If this is the case in our lives, we definitely need to reassess our use of technology and create a balance. Hello, CHLY listeners. This is Nilufar and this is
Manisha.
So in this segment, Manisha has some useful and interesting information about social media addiction and its impact on our brain and mental health. So can you tell us about social media addiction, Manisha?
Yes, I certainly can. So it has become extremely popular to scroll through the social media over the last decade. According to addictioncenter.com, social media addiction is a behavioral addiction that is characterized as being overly concerned about social media, driven by an uncontrollable urge to log on to or use social media and devoting so much time and effort to social media that it impairs other important life areas. Addictive social media use will look much like that of any other substance use, including mood modification, which means engagement in social media leads to a favorable change in emotional state. Another one is salience, that is behavioral, cognitive, and emotional preoccupation with social media. Tolerance, that is ever-increasing use of social media over time. Withdrawal symptoms, that is experiencing unpleasant physical and emotional symptoms when social media is restricted or social media use is restricted or stopped. Conflict, that is interpersonal problems because of social media usage. And finally, relapse, that is addictive individuals quickly revert back to their excessive social media usage after an abstinence period.
That's very similar to any other substance use. That's very interesting.
According to addictioncenter.com, the phenomena of social media addiction can largely be contributed to the dopamine-inducing social environments that social networking sites provide. Social media platforms such as Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram produce the same neural circuitry that is caused by gambling and recreational drugs to keep consumers using their products as much as possible. Studies have shown that the constant stream of retweets, likes, and shares from these sites have affected the brain's reward area to trigger same kind of chemical reaction as the drugs, such as cocaine. In fact, neuroscientists have compared social media interaction to a syringe of dopamine being injected straight into the system.
Oh, wow, that's very interesting. We generally don't think about these things when we use Facebook, Instagram, or other social media sites.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how social media affect the brain?
Yeah, so due to the effect that it has on the brain, social media is addictive both physically and psychologically. According to a new study by Harvard University, posting about yourself on social networking sites light up the same part of the brain that also ignites when taking an addictive substance. The reward area in the brain and its chemical messenger pathways affects decisions and sensations. When someone experiences something rewarding or uses an addictive substance, neurons in the principal dopamine-producing areas in the brain are activated, causing dopamine levels to rise. Therefore, a brain receives a reward and associates the drug or activity with positive reinforcement. This is seen in social media usage when an individual gets a notification such as like or mention, like a comment. The brain receives a rush of dopamine and sends it along reward pathways, causing him or her to feel pleasure or happiness. Social media provides an endless amount of immediate rewards in the form of attention from others for relatively minimal effort. Therefore, the brain rewires itself through this positive reinforcement, making people desire likes, comments, and reactions through emojis. Another factor of social media addiction is in fact that the reward centers of brain are most active when people are talking about themselves. In real life, it's estimated that people talk about themselves around 30 to 40% of the time. However, social media is all about showing off one's life and accomplishments, so people talk about themselves about 80% of the time. When a person posts a picture and gets positive social feedback, it stimulates the brain to release dopamine, which again rewards that behavior and extends the social media habit. Social media use becomes problematic when someone views social networking sites as an important coping mechanism to relieve stress, loneliness, or depression. For these people, social media use provides continuous rewards that they are not receiving in real life and end up engaging in the activity more and more. This continuous use eventually leads to multiple problems, such as ignoring real-life relationships, work or school responsibilities, and physical health, which then may worsen an individual's undesirable moods. This causes people to engage in the social networking behavior even more as a way of relieving dissatisfied mood states. Consequently, when social network users repeat this recurring pattern of relieving undesirable moods with social media use, the level of psychological dependence on social media increases.
Wow, thank you so much. So you mentioned several important points to think about in our daily lives and our usage of social media. And extreme use of social media keeps us apart from reality and our daily important responsibilities. So how do we recognize social media addiction?
The Addiction Center explains that if you're worried that you may have a risk of developing a social media addiction, then you ask yourself these 6 questions. Do you spend a lot of time thinking about social media or planning to use social media? Do you feel urges to use social media more and more? Do you use social media to forget about personal problems? Do you often try to reduce use of social media without success? Do you become restless or troubled if unable to use social media? Do you use social media so much that it has had a negative impact on your job or studies? If you answered yes to more than 3 of these questions, then you may have or been developing a social media addiction.
Oh, that's a handy criteria to check if you're developing social media addiction.
Yeah.
So, is there any correlation between social media and mental health?
Research has shown that there is an undeniable link between social media use and negative mental health and low self-esteem. These negative emotional reactions are not only produced due to social pressure of sharing things, but also the comparison of material things and lifestyles with others. On Instagram and Facebook, users see advertisements and posts that are specifically designed to appeal on the basis of your interest. While scrolling through this content, people may see a post by an individual that has a great job, excellent partner, or beautiful home, and they feel happy or inspired by this person. Others, however, may see these pictures and feel jealous, depressed, or even suicidal due to the fact that their own life is not as perfect as those they see on Facebook or Instagram.
Oh, wow.
So the Addiction Center specifies some recent studies that have found frequent social network users believe that other users are happier and more successful than they are, especially when they do not know them in real life. Social media facilitates an environment in which people are comparing their realistic offline selves to the flawless, filtered, and edited online versions of others, which can be detrimental to mental well-being and perception of self. So excessive social media use can not only cause unhappiness and general dissatisfaction with life in users, but also increase the risk of developing mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. Constantly comparing oneself to others can lead to the feelings of self-consciousness or a need to be perfect, which can often lead to a social anxiety disorder. If you look at another aspect of social anxiety triggered by online media use is the fear of missing out, the extreme fear of not being included or missing a social event. For example, someone may see pictures of a party where he or she was not invited, or of a fun outing that they were unable to attend because of work or school obligations, and experience anxiety that no one misses them as a result, or they will be forgotten since they are not there. Fear of missing out can take a toll on self-esteem and lead to compulsive checking of social media platforms to ensure that an individual isn't missing out on anything, which can cause problems at the workplace and in the classroom. In 2017, a study conducted by Harvard University researchers found that social media has a significant effect on the emotional well-being of chronic users and their lives, negatively impacting their real-life relationships and academic achievement.
Thank you so much, Manisha, for providing such great information about social media addiction and its influence on our brain and mental health.
Our listeners can visit theaddictioncenter.com for more information regarding this issue. Now we're going to shift the focus by talking about how it puts youth at risk. An estimated 27% of children who spend 3 or more hours a day on social media exhibit symptoms of poor mental health. Overuse of social networking sites is much more problematic in children and young adults because their brains and social skills are still developing. Research has shown that adolescents who habitually use social media from a young age have severely stunted social interaction skills. Despite the fact that users are interacting with each other on these platforms, many of them don't necessarily translate to the real world or relates to the real world. Studies have found that these individuals have worsened social anxiety in groups, higher rates of depression, negative body image, and lowered levels of empathy and compassion towards others when surveyed.
Yeah, so according to the Addiction Center, the competition for attention and likes can even lead to online bullying. Name-calling, rumor spreading, and harassment among adolescents has always happened, but social media presents young users more opportunities to do so than ever before. Teenage girls are at particular risk for cyberbullying through use of social media. However, boys are not immune. Face-to-face bullying, Face-to-face bullying, the spreading and posting of non-consensual, explicit picture is a form of cyberbullying that has gained popularity within recent years. 1/4 of teens say they have been sent explicit images that they didn't ask for, while 7% say someone has shared explicit images of them without their consent. This type of abuse, along with other forms of cyberbullying, has led to increased suicidal rates among young people. Additionally, these factors have also contributed to the development of increased level of anxiety in teens and adolescents. So, Manisha, can you give us some information of what can we do about it?
So this is a serious issue. Luckily, the social media addiction is very treatable. As a precaution, the person should engage in a digital detox. Means a period of time during which someone significantly reduces the time spent or even abstains from using electronic devices such as smartphones or computers. This can include simple steps such as turning off sound notifications and only checking social media sites once an hour. Other changes can include having periods in the day where there is a self-imposed non-screen time, such as during meal times or leaving the phone in a separate room at night. This allows for a restored focus on social interaction in the physical world, in the real world, and reduces dependency on social networking sites. However, if the addiction is too severe, you may require professional help. If you have a hard time controlling your social media use and think you may be addicted, contact a dedicated treatment specialist. They can help you find the rehabilitation program that's best suited for your needs and get you started on the path towards recovery today. Visit addictioncenter.com for more information. All of the information on their page has been reviewed and verified by a certified addiction professional. Thank you.
Thank you. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to a Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM. We just talked about social media addiction and its impact on our brain and mental health. Up next is Kristen with her golden nugget of information.
Who doesn't love little nuggets of information, especially when it comes to your health? Now, while we don't actually have the golden nuggets for you, this is certainly worth its weight in gold. So let's dig into your healthy golden nugget for the week. Hello and welcome back, listeners. Kristen here of the Sound Constitution, and I'm going to be giving a little nugget about resources to help manage social media and device use in the home. So life as a parent is difficult enough raising children and can get quite complicated when navigating the ever-expanding and ever-changing forms of social media and devices. And while various devices such as TVs, computers, smartphones, and tablets can help inform us in various ways, it is important to smartly manage our family's media use. So too much screen time can increase the risk of obesity, can also get in the way of sound sleep, and can interfere with a child's ability to learn and form healthy relationships. Luckily, HealthLink BC lists a few ways in which you can manage digital media and screen time, and I'm just going to list off a few for you, their listeners. So the first one they say is you can lead by example. Put down your own device and talk with your children. Turn off your TV and other devices when they aren't in use, and engage in play, games, reading, and other family activities. These activities give children the different experience they need to understand the world around them. Next, set limits on children's total daily screen time. It may be tempting to use screens as a soother or babysitter, but stay away from that as best as you can. Children need attention from you and the family and interaction with the real world to develop. Next, promote good sleep. Keep screens out of the bedroom and turn off roughly around 1 hour before bedtime. Screens can distract children from going to sleep on time. The blue light from screens interferes with sound sleep, and violent or exciting video games or shows can keep children awake. So try having a basket or a bin away from bedrooms where children can put their cell phones, laptops, tablets, and other devices so they don't use them in bed. Next, support healthy weight. Make your family dining table a media-free zone. Devices can lead to overeating, because they distract children from listening to their bodies to know when they are full. Make sure your children gets plenty of activity away from screens. The more time children stay in front of screens, the more likely they are to become overweight. And lastly, let's keep children safe online. Social media can help create relationships based on hobbies and interests, but it can also expose children to cyberbullying, sexting, and online predators, such as sex offenders and identity thieves. Explain to older children that you will need to check their media devices and apps. You'll want to see what websites they visit and what messages they send and receive. And rest assured, parents, this is not to be nosy, but to ensure the safety of children who can be vulnerable to various online attacks. So even choosing just one or two of the above can help. Resources from HealthLink BC and Media Smarts can help parents and their children develop media literacy. Well, what is media literacy? Media literacy builds an understanding of the role media has in society and allows us to think critically, evaluate, and understand the messages they're sending. Media literacy is an essential skill in the digital age. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick listen to Media Smart's introductory video for parents around social media and children.
Keeping up with kids' social media use can be challenging because there's always something new coming around the corner. Just when you've got a handle on one platform, your kids have moved on to the next latest thing. But you don't have to worry about learning how to use all of them yourself. Instead, focus on understanding how your kids are using them, and if there's a new service they want to sign up for, what you need to talk about before they do. To get an idea of how important social media are in your kids' lives, think way back to how important the telephone was for us when we were teens. Social media plays the same role, but with a lot more advantages. Beyond being a great way to communicate, you can also explore different identities and show the world who you are. Sometimes it may seem like your kids want to join a new social network every day, because of course, all their friends are already on it. So how do you decide when to say yes and when to say no? The first step is to see if the social network your kids want to join has an online safety center. These centers can be really helpful because they clearly outline the site's safety and privacy features and the rules members are expected to follow. Reviewing a platform's safety center is also a good idea because there can be big differences in how social networks encourage users to connect. For example, some platforms are private by default, which means that people can't see what you post unless you approve them as contacts. Kids can use private by default networks like Facebook to keep in touch with friends and family. Others are public by default. Instagram and Twitter are examples, which means that anyone can see what you post unless you specifically say otherwise. But even private networks encourage you to share your posts as widely as possible. And public networks have tools that let you control who sees what you post. Here are some basic ground rules to discuss before letting your kids sign up for a social network. Rule number 1. Check the age requirement on the site. Most social networks say that you have to be at least 13 to join. There is a reason this age was chosen. Kids under 13 still have a lot to learn about life. They're pretty vulnerable when it comes to their relationships with friends, their body image, and gender identity, which can be negatively affected by the intense environment that is often a part of social media. Also, if your kids pretend to be older in order to sign up, they could be exposed to inappropriate content, like ads for adult-oriented products. Rule number 2. When setting up a profile, only give out the information that you have to. Social network companies want as much data as they can get, so they may prompt you that your profile isn't complete. Marketers need data to help build your profile, which they then use to decide what ads you'll see. All you need to give is the information that's mandatory. usually marked with an asterisk. It doesn't really matter what username you choose, so long as your friends can find you. Some networks expect you to use your real name, and others allow a pseudonym, but there's no evidence that either choice is any safer. Rule number 3, pick a secure password. This is something all of us need to learn. Any guesses on the top 2 passwords in 2014? If you said 123456 and password, you're on your way to becoming a champion hacker. Of course, the most important tip is to never share passwords with anyone outside the family. Because older kids are more likely to do this, talk to your teens about not sharing passwords with friends. And our final tip is to remember to log out when you're done. Many kids whose accounts have been hacked simply left their accounts logged in. Identity theft is a real issue. Ask your kids, how would you feel if a stranger took your identity and started messaging your friends and family?
If you're just tuning in now, we just listened to a wonderful video from Media Smarts, which was an introductory video for parents around social media and their children. Media Smarts is a Canadian non-profit charitable organization that looks to provide us with tools to develop our own media literacy and engage our youth to think critically about the media they use and see. You can check out more on their website at mediasmarts.ca. This is Kristen with the Sound Constitution, and thank you for listening to my nugget on social media and device use in the home and ways you can help manage it. Thank you for listening to our Healthy Golden Nugget for the week. Hello, CHLY listeners. You're here with Nilafar, Manisha, and myself, Kristen. And up next, we're going to talk about self-esteem, body image, and how media impacts how we view ourselves. So what exactly is body image and self-esteem?
So, as it is mentioned in jessieslegacy.com, a nonprofit agency of Family Service North Shore, which is also affiliated with HereToHelp.ca, body image is both the mental picture you have of your own body and how you see yourself when you look in a mirror. Self-esteem is how you value and respect yourself as a person. Self-esteem affects how you take care of yourself emotionally, physically, and spiritually.
Body image and self-esteem directly influence one another. When you have a healthy body image, you feel comfortable about your body and know how to care for it. When someone doesn't like their body, they may not feel good about themselves or take care of themselves. This can mean not eating or sleeping enough, staying away from friends and family, or turning down chances to do things they would otherwise enjoy.
Okay. So that means having a healthy body image means recognizing the qualities and strengths that make us feel good about ourselves then. Okay. So what can I and our listeners do to have a healthy body image?
Okay, so treat your body with respect. Eat balanced meals with a variety of nutrition and appealing foods.
Enjoy regular, moderate exercise for the joy of feeling your body move and grow stronger, not simply to burn calories and control body fat. Get enough rest so you can enjoy each day. Don't judge yourself and others based on weight, shape, or size.
Respect people based on the qualities of their character and accomplishments, not just because they appear slim, well-built, or well put together. Dress in a way that makes you feel good.
Get rid of all the clothes in your closet that don't fit. This includes clothes that you can wear only when dieting and clothes you wear to draw attention away from your body shape. Donate or put away clothing that you don't wear. Make room for clothes that you enjoy wearing.
And finally, surround yourself with positive friends and family who recognize your uniqueness and like you just as you are. When you're around people and things that make you feel good, you're less likely to base your self-esteem on how your body fits the media's definition of beauty.
Okay. Thanks, Nilafar and Manisha. So, I don't know, how can I know if advertising and media are influencing how I see myself?
Seeing an ad makes you feel dissatisfied or depressed about your body and weight. Or your role models for beauty are fashion models and celebrities. You read and believe articles or commercials that tell you the perfect body is just a diet away.
Okay, thanks for that. So, in what ways does the media influence us?
Do you sometimes look in the mirror and not like what you see? You are not alone. We all have days when we feel awkward or uncomfortable in our bodies. We feel the pressure to measure up to the way a model looks in a magazine or how an actor or actress looks on a TV show. Through the internet and social media, we are exposed to these unrealistic beauty standards in our everyday life. Our models and celebrities we see in these images seem so happy, rich, and popular. It's an image of beauty and lifestyle that most of us can only dream about. When we are confronted with these ideals of attractiveness that we can't achieve, it can feel isolating. It can change the perception we have about how our own bodies look. It's not just traditionally defined girls and women who are influenced by these images. Everyone, regardless of how they define themselves along the spectrum, can be influenced. The powerful effect of media images on self-esteem and body image can lead to disordered eating.
Yeah, one study from the University of Pittsburgh found a correlation between time spent scrolling through social media apps and negative body image feedback. Those who had spent more time on social media had 2.2 times the risk of reporting eating and body image concerns compared to their peers who spend less time on social media. The need to gain likes on social media can cause teens to not only alter their appearance, but make choices they would otherwise not make, including accepting risky social media challenges and engaging in negative behaviors.
Okay, so we can then learn to understand that these images, whether they come from magazines or Facebook, don't necessarily tell the whole story. I believe this is called media literacy. So now, what can we do, myself and the listeners, to become more aware?
Be aware of how the body is presented in ads and are distorted or manipulated, photographed with special lighting and then retouched and enhanced using computer software.
Question why these companies and their advertisers create false standards of beauty. Make the money you spend reflect the person you are, not the person you're told you should be. Be a role model to yourself and others. Develop your own style and celebrate who you are. Break free from restrictive ways media and advertising say we should look.
Avoid media that makes you feel anxious about yourself or your body. Become a critical consumer of media. Protest the negative images and messages you see by writing letters to advertisers, television stations, and movie studios.
Encourage media and advertising to showcase bodies of all sizes and backgrounds. Remember that the media and beauty industries want to make money, not to help you to reach your full potential. Only you can decide what the best you looks like.
Awesome. Thank you so much there, Nilüfer and Manisha. And I think even myself sometimes forget that a lot of the images we see are, someone else's ideal standards of beauty. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to kind of justify to myself that, that's not ideal and that it's computer generated. And even though myself, I am aware of this fact, can still be swept away by these images of kind of what the quote unquote perfect body should look like.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All the information can be found at jessyslegacy.com, a nonprofit agency of Family Services North Shore, which is affiliated with HereToHelp.ca. Up next is a song called Addiction by Felix New.
We don't seem to wanna know it. We don't seem to wanna know it. Oh wow, we don't seem to know how. We always on our phones now, and can't seem to put them down. Oh wow, we don't seem to know how. We're always on our phones now, and can't seem to put them down. Oh wow, please just it's a choice. I say it's an addiction, and then they look back at their screens to avoid the friction. Let's stop with all this fiction. We're dealing with addiction, causing unhappiness and then eviction from a world that is magical, and they deny that it's tragical. It's not nothing. They seem to turn a blind eye, like what the hell we doing? Ain't we doing with our time? Anxiety rates skyrocketing high. Connection is like only online, and then they seem to lose touch, cause screens aren't enough, and I'm not saying it's so bad. We just got to control it. Like, do you control that new phone? Does it control you? Hey yo, who really controls it? Oh, we don't seem to know how. We're always on our phones. We can't seem to put them down. Oh, please just put your phone down. I wanna get to know ya. See the world that's all around.
Hey, I'm not trying to say phones are the devil or something, but you know, social media is a serious thing. And if we don't learn how to control our usage, we're going to suffer. And many of us phones can be great and can be great tools to elevate our lives, but if we don't control our usage, we're going to suffer. And many of us already do. That's all.
We don't seem to know how. We're always on our phones. We can't seem to put them down. Oh, please just put your phone down. I wanna get to know ya. See the world that's all around.
You just listened to a song called Addiction by Felix New. Hello and welcome back again. You're listening to 101.7 CHLY and this is the Sound Constitution. Today we're talking about social media addiction. Up next is our interview with Taban Behin. She's currently doing a PhD program under Social Dimensions of Health at the University of Victoria. Thanks for joining us again. Taban was with us for another episode in spring and talked about social dimensions of health and mental health of the younger generation.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So you've been doing research about the impact of social media and smartphones on young people's lives. So what are some of your findings?
Sure. No, well, thank you for having me again. As I mentioned, I think last time I was here, we talked a little bit about like the social dimensions of health and how they relate to young people. So just thinking about their mental health, emotional and spiritual health, and how we can actually serve to, like, just as a larger society, as families, institutions, how we can support young people in their development. So this time, I'm still actually in the same program. I'm still doing my PhD right now in the social dimensions of health at the University of Victoria. I'm in my second year, and right now I'm really still I'm exploring this whole topic of looking at the impact of technology on young minds, on how young people actually interact with technology, how we also shape the way that technology is developed, and how we can potentially do that. So I'm here in Nanaimo, and I'm working with mostly Indigenous populations here in Nanaimo, which has been really exciting for me. So there's a lot that I've been learning about the impact of technology on young minds. So I'm wondering, I'm happy to share with you a few of the findings, and really my own research has yet to be started.
For sure, yeah. I will be happy to hear some of these findings.
Sure. Yeah, that would be great. So absolutely. So some of the things that right now, I've been just doing a lot of research and reading. So in particular, I've been focusing on some of the authors, like going back to Jacques Ellul and Denis Goulet. They look at like the history and the philosophy of technology. And then there are like some authors like, there's one author that maybe your listeners know about, who's Jean Twang, and she's from San Diego State University. And she shares a lot about like this whole notion of this generation of youth and how she describes them actually and labels them as the iGen. And she talks about how they differ from previous generations. So she talks about, I'm sure your listeners, everyone is aware that like we had the baby boomers, which are like after the Second World War until the 60s. And then there were the Gen Xers, which was from the 60s and the 70s. And then we had the millennials from the 80s and the 90s. And she said around 1995 till about 2012, she would describe a certain generation, which she calls the I generation. And she offers some sort of, she's noted like basically through her own research, where she's taken sort of large bodies of information and analyzed how basically there are different trends that have taken place. So she looks at the same age group in each generation and some of the same questions that were asked of those populations. And we're talking about thousands of people who were surveyed. And she basically has identified about 10 trends in this generation that actually weren't there in previous generations. So I wonder, your listeners might be interested to know about these trends, especially if they have children. But if it's I'll share.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So one of the trends that they describe, Twang describes, is basically she describes this notion of like that this generation has sort of this extension of childhood, this feeling of not being in a hurry to grow up. So she even sort of describes it as like 18-year-olds now are acting more like 15-year-olds, 13-year-olds are acting more like 10-year-olds. So this sort of delay in our development of teens. And she talks about this idea that they're more physically safer than ever. So even like the incidences of alcohol abuse or even risky behavior or even like things like going to parties and so on, there's been like a sharp decline since 2009, 10, 11, those years. Those are the years where they see a decline in sort of unsafe behaviors, they describe. And yet she talks about this idea of the same generation being more vulnerable in terms of mental health. So she's very interested in this idea. The second trend is she talks about this notion of the internet and how much time they're really spending on their phones and what that has replaced. Then the third trend is that she talks about this notion of being in person no more, which is basically this notion of the decline of interpersonal interaction between young people. Then the fourth trend she describes is this notion of insecurity. The sharp rise in mental health issues that have arisen from and is related to that internet use and that isolation that it creates. She describes also as another trend, the fifth one is irreligiousness, and she talks about the decline in religion and spirituality. She talks about, like, for instance, with the Gen Xers and the millennials, there was this notion of being like spiritual and religious at first, and then there was this notion of being spiritual but not religious. And then she said with this generation, actually, there's even sort of a sort of denial of spirituality altogether, and sort of intrinsic motivation for things. So she talks about, like, actually when they interviewed groups of college students, how more and more of this generation are describing extrinsic sort of motivators like money, like fame, like power, things related to sort of extrinsic things basically on the outside that motivate us rather than a feeling of self-satisfaction, purpose, those sort of inner motivators. Then the next thing she talks about is this idea of being insulated but not intrinsic. And what that means is that she talks about, like, there's an interest in safety, so maintaining our own personal safety, but actually not so much this notion of civic involvement. And so she actually talks about this idea that less and less our young people are actually engaged with reading the news, understanding current affairs, but they have strong opinions, which they're happy to voice, especially in social media, on topics and issues. But actually, when it comes time to act on them, there isn't that sort of involvement, that sort of civic engagement. It's actually, there's been a decline in volunteerism and things like that. Then the last three are income insecurity, so different attitudes towards work, and how that is shaping how young people are engaging in the economy. She talks about this notion of being indefinite, so different attitudes towards sex and relationships and family and children. So even just the whole institution of the family shifting. She talks about this notion of inclusiveness, acceptance, equality, and free speech. So just a lot more sort of notion, like this expansion of inclusiveness of what that looks like in terms of, again, this idea of speaking out and calling for everyone feeling like they should have a voice. And then finally, she talks about this notion of independent political views, that actually there's a trend in this generation towards sort of political views that are at odds with the what we would describe as the common sort of left or right kind of views, that there are more and more sort of leanings towards independent views, and maybe just a dissatisfaction with the way that government is being run. So these are the things that she describes as trends, and I'm happy to go any deeper or however you'd like to.
Thank you. Very interesting. So you touched on the extension of childhood and internet usage, and this notion of being isolated that leads to insecurity. So how are these related?
It's a good question. And I think this is something, again, this is through the lens of one researcher who has basically done what we call like a meta-analysis. She's taken a lot of information and looked at a lot of different studies and done her own analysis. Now, for myself, I'm also thinking through it and trying to understand what are these relationships. And then also she herself, Twang herself, actually acknowledges that not all of these trends are negative, but they do have an impact on one another. There are relationships between them. So she does describe, like, for instance, this idea of the extension of childhood into adolescence, that, more and more basically what I described earlier of 18-year-olds acting more like 15-year-olds, 13 like 10. It's basically this idea that it seems, and she explored this a little bit in depth, and to ask questions like, is it just that teenagers are becoming more responsible? Because what she was seeing in trends was basically fewer teenagers were getting into trouble, fewer young people between, let's say, 12 and 18 were engaging in risky behaviors, which I described. But then she also saw that fewer teenagers are actually, like, for instance, getting driver's licenses or driving more than once a week on their own. Or even she looked at some of the data on how many teenagers feel like their parents know where they are at all times, and that there's been a sharp increase in that. And that's probably because of smartphones and texting and keeping track of one another. Then she also looked at, like, how many teenagers run away from home, and there's been, like, a sharp decline since 2010. Now, she actually points out, like, in all of this, is that in 2012, that was when those young people who were born in 1995 came of age. They began to become teenagers. And in 2012, that was when sort of smartphones were really introduced en masse. So this was a generation that basically they grew up with this notion of smartphones right there. So this accessibility of one another, reaching out to one another, letting each other know where they are, all these things has led to a safer sort of life for teenagers. And that's not necessarily, you can argue that that's not a bad thing. That's actually wonderful in some ways. So the challenge in it, I think she was talking about, is now what has replaced, or what has some things that we've, unfortunately, some like negative sides to it, is that with this sort of safety has also come maybe with the increased use of the internet and being online and on social media and so on, is actually the time that we're spending on our smartphones has increased. Even its accessibility, that every teenager, perhaps, or quite a majority of young people have access to a smartphone or an iPad or a tablet. She describes that the sheer number of hours, firstly, that they're spending doing that sort of thing is replacing time spent doing other activities. And maybe those other activities would have led to greater sort of interaction with people, led to growing self-esteem. So what she's seeing is this other trend of this isolation leading to actually great insecurities. emerging. So we see like the incidence of depression, especially actually among young women. It seems to be a sharp increase in the number of young women who are claiming to be depressed. And she argues that perhaps that has to do with issues around self-image and in relation to sort of the way that social media portrays and allows you to sort of polish this idea of what the person's life looks like. And then you have this sort of feeling like even just, I think probably people have heard about like Facebook depression, where if you don't get enough likes, you become saddened. These sorts of things that kind of emerge because then if you're spending more time on the internet and spending less time with your friends, then actually what happens is there's more emphasis on that world rather than on the friends and friendships that you're developing in person. So that's where it causes sort of these insecurities. And it's not just minor sort of changes. Actually, there's quite sharp differences. And she also described that it doesn't have to do with also whether someone has more money. Their socioeconomic level doesn't seem to matter. She said initially it may have, but then actually they're finding that people have, whether you have like an iPhone or a Samsung or you're lower or higher income, more and more people have access to things like social media and the internet. So it cuts across culture, it cuts across socioeconomic levels, and it actually relates to, and I'm sure your listeners are aware as well, that it affects every single family and most young people who have access to smartphones. Mm-hmm. So these are just things that I think we could then see these relationships between, and as you asked that question around how are they related to one another, these are some of the things that I observed. Yeah.
Thank you. So what are the implications on our society?
It's a good question, and I think she explores this, and this is exactly what my research, my hope is that I'll be able to uncover a little bit more, especially within the context of, let's say, Vancouver Island, and with populations that are sort of culturally based, like Indigenous populations, is like what are the implications of technology on young lives, and how are we, certain populations, actually utilizing technology, and both as a way of survival or as a way of shaping, or, sometimes like I've even already through my own interactions and relationship building have seen that young people sometimes even use technology as a way of coping with stress, with anxiety, with even trauma and issues. That it's a way of sort of dissociating from whatever it is that they're going through. And again, I'm not saying that that's a good thing necessarily, because eventually we do have to face those issues. And but then I'm wondering how we can actually utilize technology in more positive ways. So the implications are, I think, is that it actually, I'm sure even your listeners, if there are parents out there or even older siblings or even younger siblings who are listening, is sort of asking questions. How am I engaging with smartphones, with technology? Because actually in our society, very few institutions are asking that questions. Like the government doesn't necessarily have any guidelines for the use of technology, even the development of technology. It's usually just related to, like, we have Canadian content or things like that, but there isn't a lot of guidelines around how technology is developed. And often the technology that's developed, it's designed for adults, the adult consumer. So really it's corporations that are making decisions about the technology that is developed. So how can we think about how we're utilizing that technology, given it hasn't been necessarily been designed for, let's say, our 3-year-old who's holding an iPad, or it hasn't been designed for that 12-year-old young person who is navigating, imagine, a whole world of information and trying to figure out who they are in that context, and largely in isolation. So how much time do they spend on the internet? And even, I guess my personal opinion is sort of this feeling of, rather than coming from a punitive sort of setting measures, or maybe alongside, if that's your style, is actually also asking questions and really exploring, like, how does this make you feel when you look at this, or what are the things that help you? Even Twenge goes so far as to suggest that even with young people, if they want to engage in social media, she talks about sort of her own principles that she suggests is sort of sticking to less permanent sort of social media ones that don't leave a lasting mark, because I don't think we realize like what we post on Facebook, it stays for a long time in the internet universe. So even when, let's say, a 13, 14, 15-year-old, if they have access to social media, how do we help them sort of also not have such a lasting impact on their own lives? Those were some of the things that she talks about. She talks about also this idea of how can we even encourage young people to see the importance of person-to-person interaction. And even in our own lives, we can model that. Is nothing will replace that interaction between people, our loved ones, our community. How can we maintain sort of active involvement in community life so that it doesn't become our only source of connecting with others is through social media or through the internet? So those are some of the things that are suggested. And I'm a big proponent of this idea of understanding, helping with volition. So as we help to explore this more, we can actually think about what are the decisions and the choices we want to make in our lives. One thing I wanted to mention is that I found that actually in Nanaimo, there's quite a few people who are thinking about this question of technology and its implications on society and on our families and children. I know that our school district, we have a few sort of staff and teachers who've come together and they've created some parent info nights. And it's more of a discussion group that they have, and it's within the space that's quite safe, where parents can come together and share some of their struggles, even some of their wins and their successes in relation to how they're helping to think about social media and the internet and technology use and in their families' lives. So if you're interested, I think just going to the School District 68 or contacting someone at the school district just to find out when those info sessions are, I found that to be really helpful as well as a resource.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Taban.
Thank you so much for having me.
So thank you. We talked about how young people being affected by technology and how it impacts their development and their mental health and emotional development. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. We encourage you to reach out to your healthcare provider for more information. As always, check out our Facebook page for resources for today's show. Every episode is uploaded to our YouTube channel if you'd like to hear it again.
If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, let us know by email at asoundconstitution@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM.